All right, we're back. Let's break down this Kansas City current roster because one of the things that we also really enjoy when we're looking at teams during the preseason are all the names that sort of end up on a preseason roster. So many, jokes that go around if it's going to be over or under 30 players for some teams. But let's take a look at Kansas City and maybe look at some of the players that we haven't had a chance to chat about already with this team. The goalkeepers, I mean, stands out with Adriana Franch, Cassie Miller, also amongst the goalkeeping core here. They also had Ashley Orcus, someone they drafted, and Jordan Silkowitz, also a draftee for to round out with four goalkeepers during preseason. A hefty number, double digits, 11 with defenders: Elizabeth Ball, Kate Delfava, Alex Loera, Haley Mace, Addison Merrick, Makia McInnes. We've got Gabby Robertson, Izzy Rodriguez, Ella Schomburger, Mallory Weber, and Jenna Weinbrenner. Midfielders: Ryan Childers, Chardonnay Coran, Dabinia, Vanessa DiBernardo, Morgan Gautrat. We've talked a little bit about those players already. But Lola Bonta, Claire Lavauger, Chloe Lagarzo, Sam Mewis, and Desiree Scott included in the midfield core as well. And forwards, they listed 5 with Michelle Cooper, Kristen Hamilton, Cece Kaiser, Mimi Larson, and Alexa Spantra to round things out there. So we're going 4 goalkeepers, 11 and 10 midfielders, and 5 forwards
I
for Kansas City current. There's a there's a lot of names here.
I know. That's the thing. There's a lot of names on this preseason roster. And a lot of really good names. I mean, I couldn't help but giggle and smile when you're running through the midfielders. I mean,
Yeah.
Dabinia, Vanessa DiBernardo, Morgan Gautrat, Lola Bonta, Claire Lavauger, Chloe Lagarzo,
Yep.
Desiree Scott,
Endless.
and Sam Mewis, right? Like this is some other things. This may be considered a loss. I mean, we don't know how far she'll be out, but Sam Mewis, one of the players on this roster and with the United States Women's National Team that is out due to injury. She put out a statement a few weeks ago saying that her recovery is taking longer than she expected, and she's going to be out for a bit for the foreseeable future. Who knows what that means, how long that'll really be? But I think when you're a Kansas City team, you cannot expect to get a player like that back this year, and if you do, you're just excited and you're happy and you're going to run with it. But you have to move forward with the pieces you have. Expect the worst, hope for the best kind of situation. But running through this roster, I think goalkeepers, I have to start with them because there are 4 listed on this roster, and AD Franch being one of them, who is a U.S. international who has been consistently called up in the last several months to the United States Women's National Team. And they've also got a Cassie Miller who could start and play. So I think, like, in looking down the line of the 2023 year, knowing that it's a World Cup year, knowing that there's going to be a send-off series for the U.S., knowing that there's going to be a lot of different pieces coming in and out, you are very pleased if you're Matt Potter with an AD Franch and a Cassie Miller as your number 1 and your number 2 in goal. I mean, that's a great base. That's a great base. And you're also returning so many incredible pieces from last year in a Haley Mace and Addison Merrick, who stepped into this team and started making an impact immediately. A Jenna Weinbrenner, an Elizabeth Ball, a Kate Delfava, Alex Luera. These are all players that were big parts of the finals run in 2022, and now you've got them back. I mean, this roster is stacked. On paper, this roster is stacked, Sandra.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's an argument to be made, in all of the movement that they had in their off season, that their re-signings were of equal importance as well. I mean, Alex Loera had a breakout rookie season, and there was just an unreal, like incomprehensible, unpredictable rookie class to evaluate and analyze in 2022 with only 3 finalists for a Rookie of the Year award, right? But you can look at Alex Loera's season with Kansas City Current and maybe sort of say, like, this is a player that might have got snubbed, in the category of, being a finalist. But this was a player that they immediately targeted in their offseason and said, we want to re-sign you. Let's renegotiate your contract. Let's lock you up. Haley Mace is going to stay with the Current for on a multi-year deal. Keito Fava was one of these players, I think, that started out with the Current and has sort of just grown and built over time over the last couple seasons with this team, sort of become this kind of reliable player for this team moving forward. So like those three players as re-signings, I thought were really, really massive for them as well.
Also looking at someone like a CC Kaiser on that
Yeah.
list as well, because this is a player that got traded from Racing Louisville to be in her hometown in Kansas City, and at the end of the 2022 season, re-signed with KC through the 2024 season. And this is a massive signing in CC Kaiser. I'm adding her right along that
Oh yeah.
list with the other ones that re-signed for sure.
And they did a lot of those first. They were like, let's
Yeah.
make sure we lock up and take care of players who got us here, who've been on this very short, very kind of you know, kind of like long journey at the same time. I mean, they've only been in existence as a franchise since 2021, but that was such a tough first season for them. Um, Ultimately staying in last place throughout the duration
Mhm.
of that inaugural season, and then having this type of turnaround in 2022. So I like that this was early on their to-do list to make sure that they kind of wrapped up and had renegotiations with those players. But that also meant that when we saw them navigating free agency, you talked a little bit about Sam Mewis, Lisa, and it just sort of felt like once we saw them making these pickups, whether it was a Morgan Gautrat, Vanessa DiBernardo, uh, what was going to happen with Sam Mewis? And we now know that they actually renegotiated her contract, bought her contract out. It's going to be in a 1 year, so she could just focus on her rehab and getting back. Because she announced that she had an additional surgery as well. So the focus for Sam Mewis is just to get healthy and try to work her way back. But it also meant that we didn't hear a lot of news or movement
Right.
around Desiree Scott either. And this was a piece that they added on and they did resign her, but this came very late in the free agency period, just ahead of preseason for this team. So then it was like, okay, so you are going to keep Desiree Scott, and that includes all of with the players that they acquired, and but there's also players that they drafted that could possibly slot into this role. But I think it's interesting that two of their I guess considered prospects out of the draft not only have signed contracts but are listed as forwards for their preseason. So we have talked a little bit about this player for some time. We were
Mhm.
able to chat with Michelle Cooper on A3, and that's kind of why we're going with her as our young prospect to watch for Kansas City. I'm not too sure, though, if we're going to see a lot of time for some of these younger players, whether it's a Cooper or a Spanstra. But I would anticipate that during a World Cup, an opportunity will present itself for some of these young players to get a run out and make an impact.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. But again, this roster already has so much talent. So adding in a player like this, um, it's very different for this team compared to last year, where they had so many rookies, but they had a lot of space to play them. They had a lot of opportunity. Now Kansas City is right. They started 2022 with nothing to lose because they finished dead last the year before. So they could only go up from there, right? Now I think there's a bit more pressure on Kansas City because they went to the final last year, because they have this target on their back as being one of the best teams. How do they fit into that narrative? And I think when you look at someone like Michelle Cooper, although she's young, coming out, entering the draft as a sophomore, finishing her sophomore year at Duke before becoming a professional, she's still a player that has a sense of maturity about her. And we had the pleasure of interviewing Michelle Cooper on Attacking Third and asking her about the process and how it worked. And yes, she's young. I mean, she is a kid, but she still had this level of maturity about her that said she was ready to be a professional from what I took away. Maybe a little bit more so than some of the other draft picks, just because of what she knew and what she understood at this point. And for a sophomore, I think that was pretty impressive. And I want Michelle Cooper to come into this team and make a really big difference. And from the way that Kansas City has already spotlighted Michelle Cooper on their social medias a little bit, it shows me that they're very pleased with what she's seeing in training. I'm going to put that out there like that.
Hey, it could signal that, we might see Michelle Cooper crack an opening day starting 11. And listen, if that happens, that is going to be incredibly cool. But with a young prospect like Cooper, it's likely that some of these younger players are going to try to look to, veterans on the team to try to mirror and learn from. And we sort of segue this by talking about somebody like Desiree Scott. But in terms of what her signing means to this team, this is also another player that they've got on their roster that they did resign, that they have retained with the club, but is also navigating this first part of the season with an injury. So this is another player that this team is not going to have for a good chunk of the season. Because let's just anticipate that somebody like Desiree Scott, who also represents Canada's national team, may likely go to the World Cup, right? So, in the event that this team is looking for that experienced player to lean on it, is it going to be Scott? And why is it going to be Scott if she's someone who may not be part of some of these early game day rosters?
Yeah, she won't be because of injury at this point. I mean, we know that now. She put out a statement saying that she's going to miss the start of the year due to an injury that Scott has picked up. But I don't think that deters us from labeling her as this experienced veteran that Kansas City needs to lean on in any way, shape, or form. Because so much of what we know from Desi Scott is yes, her performance on the pitch as a defensive midfielder. She's nicknamed the Destroyer. We see her do it for club, for country. She is stable. She's so even keeled in that midfield. That's exactly who you want your captain to be, your leader, your playmaker in the midfield and on the pitch, understanding everything that they have to do to be that leader, but also off the pitch. She's a player that so many of her teammates have talked about as being a big sister or one that takes others under their wings. And we know that's going to happen whether she's playing on the pitch or not due to injury. So it has to be Scott in this position. And I think it's pretty interesting because Desiree Scott was a free agent this year, and she was on that free agency list for a very long time before Kansas City re-signed her. And Sandra, you and I don't know what that story is about. If she was looking elsewhere, if Kansas City made an offer immediately and Desi wanted to kind of pursue other options, see what was out there, play the game a little bit, maybe ask for a bit more money, see what had happened. And ultimately, she did re-sign with Kansas City, which is where she started her career 10 years ago in the NWSL. But I think that was a little interesting to see that Scott signed so late in the free agency period. And now that she is back and she is recovering from injury, I imagine that she'll want to take on that role as veteran leader, experienced even more so than before because she did re-sign with this same team.
I mean, I think it's gonna sort of be a little bit of a locker room role for a little
Yeah.
bit, at least as she continues to navigate the injury. But I mean, I think you said it best when you said that, players have referred to, this player as kind of that professional to sort of follow by example. Um, my gosh, we're talking about players that we've had the opportunity to chat with. I remember when we had, Alex Loera on the show, and this was someone who was navigating her rookie season. And then we asked her in the lead up to the playoffs, like, who was someone that she was trying to emulate. And she referenced Desiree Scott specifically. So I would anticipate that this is going to be a player that will still sort of hold that role amongst her teammates. And maybe even as she goes out to World Cup duty, because that's what we got to talk about too. How is this team
Exactly.
going to be affected by the World Cup window when it comes into like who's the international spotlight on? And we are going off the assumption that somebody like Desiree Scott is trying to make sure that she is healthy and ready to go for selection for Canadian national team. But we're also looking at a player like Dabinia, who is likely going to be a big piece of what Brazil wants to present at the World Cup. But we also are keeping an eye on Adriana Franch as well. There have typically and traditionally been three goalkeepers that are named to a final World Cup roster. And we have seen the same three goalkeepers called into camps with Vlatko Andonovski for some time now. It's been a combination of Alyssa Nair, Casey Murphy, and Adriana Franch. So amongst these three players, I think possibly a big miss might be someone like a Dabinia,
Yeah.
but I also believe that Adriana Franch is someone whose absence that they might feel as well, because this is a player I think in watching their 2022 season you could tell that they really pulled from. There were moments and stretches and matches throughout the 2022 season that just sort of felt like Adriana Franch games, and
Oh,
the reason they
yeah.
got results was because Franch had a standout game.
Not just the reason Casey got results, but the reason AD Franch is back on the US roster right now is
Yeah.
because of her performance with Kansas City in 2022. I mean, lights out performances, keeping the team in games, keeping shutouts, getting them, right? A big part of getting them through the playoffs and to the NWSL Championship was Franch. And I think, of course, we have to tread a little bit lightly and say, hey, she could be on the roster. She could. It's likely. It's possible. I think Dabinia is one of those players that's most likely going to be with Brazil at the World Cup. And I think depending on how Kansas City plays in the midfield, she will be a very, very big loss for this midfield, because we've kind of talked about it throughout the last several minutes with KC, because of how many midfielders they have, how many veterans and starting players they have. I'm expecting to see a bit of a different formation, or something different, a little cheeky, a little tricky from Matt Potter's side to really utilize all the talent he has on his roster and put them on the pitch at the same time. Now, when you take out some of those pieces due to international tournaments like the World Cup, what do you do then? Do you stick with the formation that's maybe built around some of these players that I'm looking at a Dabinia, or do you shift back to what maybe will work better for the group as a whole? But that's asking a lot of questions of your players if they're not used to switching back and forth. So I think this come World Cup time, it'll be very interesting to see what happens with KC, because also losing someone like an AD Franch could be a bit of a drop off, right? Defensively, they're going to have to score a lot more goals. Now, again, the Challenge Cup is not happening at the start of the season. That it's happening in the middle of the season, July 9th through August 18th. The World Cup, July 20th through August 20th. So a bit of a crossover just for the Challenge Cup. Not many regular season games, but it's still a big factor that teams and coaches have to take into account.
There's a lot of pieces that they re-signed, but there's a lot of new pieces that have introduced themselves to the current, and there's going to be a lot of eyeballs on how this team gels together in the 2023 regular season. So maybe there's a little bit of a two-parter question when it comes to the biggest burning question surrounding Kansas City, because you said it, Lisa,
Mhm.
on paper this team is a contender. When you look at everything that they did through their offseason, beginning with their loss in the 2022
Yeah.
championship final. So, can Kansas City get all these moving parts running and working together? And will they make it back to the championship final?
That is the burning question. Can they get all these moving parts together? Because sometimes we see, for instance, with Casey in 2022, not so many big stars on one roster, right? You look at someone like Lola Bonta, yes, she's a big name, or a Kristen Hamilton up top, but otherwise, they had a lot of players that were coming into this league on their first or second year, and it was so much of this team chemistry bought into it. It was Kansas City that you were scared of, not an individual player. Now they've got such big names that teams are going to be a little bit scared of individual players, but can they make that fear that they're imposing into their opponents come from a whole? Because I think that's what was so special about the current team last year, is that they were all so bought in. It was such a team dynamic. Remember the celebrations? Like this team was just having fun last year. Can they redo that? I think if it can be the same type of energy as last year, where they're having fun, they're all bought in on the same thing, this will be a very successful team, because they have the pieces and the talent, but they've got to get on the same page everywhere else.
All right, well then let's roll that into a projection. What's going to be the projected finish for this team in 2023? I'll remind folks that in 2022, when we did our way too early previews and predictions for Kansas City, we went high. We said
Yep.
Kansas City is going to end their season in a top 5 finish, and they went ahead and they blew that prediction out of the water and ended up runners up in the NWSL Championship final. So I think we're gonna still stay high with this team, and but aim even higher. We've got Kansas City Current closing out 2023 with a top 3 finish.
I agree. I think that Casey will finish at the top. I mean, they finished the regular season number 5 and then entering playoffs in that number 5 spot. I think that they'll finish the regular season top 3. I want to see them host. I want to see them host a first round or get a first round bye in the playoffs. And I think they can do it. I think it's a lot of pressure for this, for any type of team to be dubbed as a top 3 finish. But this is a Kansas City team that on paper looks really good. And sometimes those are the ones that have the hardest time translating that to the pitch. But I like what Matt Potter's got going there. I like what he did last year with this team. I like the pieces that are still on this team that can bring the energy from 2022 into this 2023 roster. And they've got a lot of solid veterans that they're adding to this mix too, that know how to win, that understand what it's like to be in those high pressure situations. And I think they're going to do it. Kansas City is going to be a great team to watch this year. Top 3 finish for sure. Predicting that for 2023.